To my 400 affiliates, welcome. That music, of course, from The Wire, which if you listened earlier this year, and that wouldn't be possible if you're the new affiliate in West Virginia or the new affiliate out Northern California. The Wire made up my second week of sequestration when the fetching Mrs. Hugh and I were separated, and I was, basically shut down watching television. Finally got to watch The Wire. Excellent show. That's a backstory to yesterday afternoon. This is the first in a series of shows devoted to David Simon. Not shows, segments. They will occur as information appears. Over at HughHewitt.com, there's an email button, Contact Hugh. If you've got any information for me on this story, send it there. Put in the subject matter line, David Simon. Here's the backstory. Yesterday, I get a ping in my post-show nap, and it's from a listener who says, boy, did you get under the skin of David Simon? To which I honestly replied, who's David Simon? Because unlike Sonny Bunch, who's coming up later this hour, I actually have no idea who produces and writes television dramas because I tend to forget them. Now, I think parts of The Wire I'll never forget. It's great television. It's one of the best television series ever made. But of course, like all television series, they become laugh-in after a while. But I didn't know David Simon produced it. And so I had Matt Continetti on yesterday, and we had a great conversation about the problems with the impeachment trial of the president. And someone named Eric Kleefeld, a nobody I don't know, and Eric has got a grand total of, well, I don't know, 5 followers. I honestly do not know. Clipped it, took a little bit of it, and said, Hugh Hewitt says jurors shouldn't be on any case. Now, what I had actually said to or had discussed with, now I can't find any of this stuff. What I had really actually discussed with Matt Continetti was the difficulty in American jurisprudence, or indeed any setting, whether it's criminal, civil, or non-judicial proceeding. We never allow victims to serve as the jurors, even down like the high school disciplinary proceedings. We just don't let it. So Eric, this fellow I don't know, had written, Hugh Hewitt says the media should tell the public a major problem with the Senate impeachment trial. Victims ought never to be juror. His guest, Matt Continetti, one of the smartest people in America, replies, the mob targeted the elected officials of the United States, and there's no way I think of getting out of that situation. So in arrives David Simon. Like I said, never talked to the guy, never knew of him. Threaten, Hunter, kill those in the first branch of American government, and they can never, ever impeach you for it. F, checks and balances. This is the excellent political theory for a republic. Rare is a perfect a-hole, also a pristine moron, but Hugh Hewitt is a magical beast. Now, I've never met him, but I tweeted back when this was pointed out to me. Journalist, TV writer, and a superb one at that, doesn't understand the law generally, Constitution specifically, or due process at all. Fancy that. There's a surprise every day among the TDS afflicted. But thanks for The Wire. Enjoyed it. Finally, during the shutdown, superb work. Using the Proverbs, soft word turns away wrath. Didn't work. Came back. My invective with regard to useless gibbering F-bonnets is never mindful. And with the possible exception of Dinesh D'Souza and eschewing all other hyperbole, you are the dumbest rock in the Trumpian bucket, delivering a show fit only for dead-brained mouth breathers. That would be you, my friend. But trying to... And I replied, tell you what, David, when you are free of mindless invective, have returned to Baltimore's black community all that you appropriated from it, and undone damage you did to the city, come on my show and demonstrate your correspondence course grasp of the Constitution. Good show, though. To which he responded, as to my supposed appropriation from Baltimore, which actually cannot be denied, why, yes, I have exploited the S out of the city where I live and worked as a journalist covering the drug war. Also have exploited recon Marines, New York housing officials, porn stars and pimps, jazz musicians, police, mayors, and I hope to have the opportunity to exploit the S out of more cohorts before my career ends. The stories are political and therefore rooted in realities. Baltimore is damaged not by narratives that speak to its problems, but by problems and lack of solutions. And I respond, of course, David, you're a redeeming angel, a saint among men. and not a reflexive partisan suffering from TDS who cannot understand the plain language of the Constitution or admit to a David Milch envy so vast that every tweet is overwritten. Have another drink, read a bit. Not kind on my part, I admit it. Then David kind of went off the edge. It's not 5 o'clock and your mother has me slated in for 3 o'clock, he writes, Hugh. So I'm going to hold off on the shot and the beer, thanks. As restless, as inventive as she is, I'll need all my wits about me best. Now, of course, that is third grade level, seventh grade level, maybe. To which I responded, I quoted from a story on David Simon, which had concluded, David Simon took to replying and furthering his points, but seemed to make everything that much worse. That made him mad. Oh, Hugh, you droll little mook. Just remember to at least speak well of me when you come up from the basement to liberate my cash from your mother's purse. People criticized him at that point. He said, well, to be fair, your pretty mom, someone told him, you're in a hole, stop digging, David. He said, well, to be fair, your mom pretty much demanded I keep going, Dave. And then another person criticized him for ad hominem attack. He said, let's be fair here. I began this by happily calling him a submoronic mediocre hack, which is ad hominem as one can get. On the other hand, he is a submoronic mediocre hack. Empiricism was yoked in the harness of abuse. Sad person David Simon is. David can't resist replying, well, who wouldn't be deeply aggrieved at having you so cleverly compass me to your 4 followers? It got worse over the next few hours. He said to me, you really might want to workshop this week, F nuts. Maybe a Ramada Lodge out near the airport. He's putting on his tough cop act. The late set generally brings out a more forgiving crowd. Hewitt, you hollowed little out F-squib. You've crossed the only Rubicon that truly matters here. In your transparent attempt to cater to the beessed and bespittled deplorati, who easily squee at any half-assed trope that imagines decadent and violettes, you have wantonly, don't want to miss this correctly, you have wantonly slandered me through a linkage to the Hollywood locale. I had mentioned Hollywood people are unusually abusive on Twitter. If you ever get a single lonesome fact correct in your entire fecal-flecked career of rote hackery, and that is an ambition to exceed your entire skill set, know this, I live and work in Baltimore, Maryland, where the citizenry make a point of pausing in our routine of nightly intramural violence and disorder whenever we catch the scent of a true and enduring piece of S edging over the city line, whereon we close ranks and hunt that low F person en masse, bag him live, then barter him off in pieces for crack vials and bags of Utz crab chips. So yes, you dumb S-licking whelp of a media whore, stay where you are or keep hunting for me in West L.A., because Baltimore is not your speed, as neither are facts in reality. And it goes on. So at that point, I changed my mind. And I told him, look, I'm going to go all Ted Lasso on you, David. Something's wrong with that guy. So I started to read up on it. And that's where I asked for your help. A couple of people, by the way, who know him wrote me in the course of this saying, not a well man, and don't get involved in it. And I said, no, I'm not interested. David Judah Simon was born February 9th, 1960, so he just turned 60 2 days ago. That might have something to do with it. He worked as a reporter after graduating from the University of Maryland. And, reporters often love their work and stay in their work, or they hate their work and they drink a lot and they aspire to be something else. Well, he wrote a couple of good books, got the 2010 MacArthur Award for being a genius. He wrote the book The Corner, and I went back and listened to some interviews. He was not abnormal in the 90s. They made it into an HBO miniseries. Born in D.C., he was raised in a Jewish family, had a bar mitzvah. His family roots are Russia, Belarus, Hungary, Slovakia. He had a sister, Linda Evans, who died in 1990, so there's some trauma here. More trauma. His father was held hostage when he was in high school in a fairly famous incident here in D.C. So he was raised in D.C. or went to high school here. He wrote for the Tatler, and he graduated in 1973 from the University of Maryland. Got a job at the Baltimore Sun because he apparently did a piece that was harmful to Lefty Drizel. And that got him somewhere, and he called journalism God's work, so he got a hero complex. Then he wrote Homicide, A Year on the Killing Streets, which did pretty well. Then he got The Wire. after making Homicide for a few years on HBO. And The Wire became one of the greatest television series ever. So then you mix Hollywood into this sort of media resentment. He's also kind of a low-end Marxist. And this will go on. Again, if you know anything about David Simon and his backstory or what's going on in his life, that you can tell me without breaching confidential relationship. I don't want his doctor or his lawyers talking to me, obviously, although some journalists do that. I don't know how he practiced journalism. I don't do that way. Just hit the, go to hughhewitt.com and hit the email me button. So back to the bio of David Simon before he went crackers on me yesterday. I mean, most of his friends said, really? Mother jokes? Doing your mother upstairs? My mom's been dead since 1997, so I don't really get upset about that at 65. I note he turned 60 this week, so maybe part of this is age cracking up on somebody. But after The Wire, he produced Treme, which was, some people liked it, was pretty much a failure. Then he did Show Me a Hero, which nobody remembers. Then he did The Deuce, which become wrapped up in the Me Too movement problem. In one of my mean tweets, I said, friend of Harvey's. I don't know if he is or not, but I probably shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry, David. There's no evidence that he's friends with Harvey Weinstein, and he's never himself been accused of any inappropriate conduct except Twitter rage. And then 2 years ago, he did The Plot Against America, which was a failure. And so he described as having in development Parting the Waters, which is a very famous book, great book. Hope he gets it made. The Avenue, The Good Friday Plot, Capitol Hill, Legacy of Ashes. Tim Weiner's been a guest on this show for a long time ago. Great book. Hope he gets that made. The Pogues and A Dry Run, The Lincolns in Spain. Tells you a little bit there. Simon is known for his realistic dialogue and his journalistic approach to writing. I listened to a 97 interview with him, and actually it just sounds like the new journalism warmed over, but journalism is journalism. It's who, what, where, when, and how. He's described himself as a social democrat, broadly supporting the existence of capitalism while opposing raw, unencumbered capitalism, absent any social framework, absent any sense of community, without regard to the weakest and most vulnerable classes in society. So it's sort of sixth grade political science. And in 2013, he compared the global surveillance disclosures uncovered by Snowden, the spy, to a 1980s effort in the city of Baltimore to record the numbers dialed from payphones. Sure it was. So there's his background. So I began to think, after he went really nuts yesterday, implied threats, the mother stuff, what's wrong with this guy? I mean, I've done back and forth on Twitter with Hollywood. I got a lot of friends in Hollywood. I'm in California now. I lived in California for many, many years, and many, many names and big names, and flown around the country with them. We used to do a retreat for believers in Hollywood every year, and they brought me along because someone has to be the least cool guy in the room. And I respect their work. Like I say, The Wire is probably the best television I've ever seen, though some people say The Americans is better. I don't think so. But my Christian guilt began to get on me, and I began to pray for this guy, and I asked all my friends to do that. I don't see any signs of faith here, though he refers to Talmudic scrutiny in other places, but that can just be a trope. And I wonder, what do you think is wrong with people on Twitter who do this, who are triggered by Trump and then act like Trump? This morning's news brought word of the Lincoln Project and its meltdown, and it's in complete free fall. Maggie Astor, and you can go to my timeline to read this. Maggie Astor has demonstrated a complete, utter meltdown this morning. The Lincoln Project is hiring an outside group to investigate John Weaver's tenure there, and 6 former employees and associates are calling on Lincoln Project to release them from their non-disclosure agreements. Now, when you hear about non-disclosure agreements, you think Trump, right? Turns out a lot of people are beginning to wonder about the group's claims that they didn't know about John Weaver's behavior, and those stories are all linked. And they've got him under non-disclosure, and the money's coming out, what they did with all the money they raised. So the Lincoln Project is beginning to act like Trump, too, with their non-disclosure agreements. And David Simon acts like Trump on Twitter. And I'm beginning to wonder if the same things, the same demons that bedeviled the former president, bedevil his most obsessive critics. I'm going to ask Sonny Bunch about that. But again, if you know something about David Simon that can explain his meltdown, his anger, his just kind of unhinged approach to people, send it to me over at hughhewitt.com. It's David Simon and What the Heck's Wrong with Him series. Sonny, before I go there, let me tell you, I watched the Little Things on your advice. I am not sure about the failure to warn doctrine here. That's a bad thing to watch before you go to sleep.
Well, it's a thriller about a killer and the police's efforts to capture him. I would not recommend it as late night viewing.
All right, now I got to do a spoiler, so I want everyone to turn off their radios if they haven't seen The Little Things yet. All right, so I gave my fair warning. Is that fair warning so I can ask you a question?
Sure.
All right, that's fair warning. Did the guy who got the shovel in the head do it?
No. So the again, spoiler warnings for everybody. The language of the film makes it pretty clear it wasn't him. The killer that we see at the beginning, getting out of that car and chasing that young lady, does not have a limp.
Oh, you're right.
Which Jared Leto's character very kind of ostentatiously does. So I mean, the movie is all about. I mean, look, the movie is all about cops who kill people and get away with it, and how they get away with it, and how they hide each other's, misdeeds. The movie is about, the titular Little Things. I think is uttered at one point by Denzel Washington, right?
Yes, twice. He says it twice. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, it is a movie. It's a movie that is about cops who are serial killers, more or less. But it is not set up in such a way. It's set up in a way to kind of mimic the serial killer movies of the early to mid 90s, right? Which
that's what. Okay, now I understand what you were saying. And Denzel Washington is terrific, and the suspected serial killer, whose name I can't remember, is terrific as well. I'm not so sure about the
Jared Leto.
Yeah, Jared Leto. Now, I want to talk to you about David Simon. I think Dwayne gave you the rundown that, like Seth Rogen, out of nowhere, I become the object of these Hollywood people. And he says, no, I'm not. I'm a Baltimore guy. These Hollywood people venom online because of some Trump-related thing. They're triggered. Look, he's a brilliant guy in The Wire. He hadn't had much success since then. What do you know about him?
Well, David Simon is famously a newspaper guy. He wrote a couple of very good books, Homicide, which is about a year he had kind of embedded into the Baltimore Homicide Division, and The Corner, which was essentially about a year he spent reporting on folks who lived in Baltimore's rougher neighborhoods, dealing drugs and stuff. And the kind of the synthesis of those two books is what is The Wire. It is a look at both the cops and the crooks and kind of how they interact with each other. He's had good stuff since then. I mean, the Treme was not a huge success. It was a little too inside baseball, I guess, on post-Hurricane Katrina New Orleans. But The Deuce is very good, which was his look at the porn industry in New York City in the 1970s.
But that got him all mixed up in the Me Too stuff. Not him personally, but James Franco and the exploitation of women. And he avoided the cultural appropriation discussion regarding Baltimore because it occurred before that became a thing.
Well, I mean, I don't really know that it would apply to him on I don't know that cultural appropriation would be a weird argument to employ against him, considering he is from Baltimore.
Oh, no, not that part. The part is that the critical legal theory people that I know would say he exploited the misery of the Black American experience in Baltimore for pecuniary gain and did not return it. That's how it worked.
again, I would not personally subscribe to this theory, so I have no real
Neither do
interest
I.
in promulgating it. But sure.
So tell me, after the Deuce gets him mixed up in the porn industry and Me Too, not about himself but about James Franco, has he had any success since then?
No, I mean the Deuce went off the air last season, I believe. So
He did another
you know.
show. I was wondering if you could remember the other show offhand. I'll find it here shortly. It came out. It's called The Plot Against America.
Oh, The Plot Against America. Well, that was a critically acclaimed piece of work. I didn't watch it because I never really cared for the book on which it was based. So I'm not I wasn't that interested. But it was a relatively popular, relatively well received work. I think it got some Emmy nominations. It seemed to do okay.
So if you want to defend him, feel free to defend him. I actually am just trying to understand why he's triggered by Trump so much and resorts to sort of over-the-top invective of the both fifth grade assortment, your mother, et cetera.
Yeah,
what?
I mean, David Simon has always been a bit, hair trigger to anger on Twitter. Twitter is, a place where people are rewarded for being angry and nasty to each other, and there's a certain sort of person who gets wrapped up in that sort of thing, and he I think sometimes confuses flowery language for devastating comebacks. But it's a weird, stressful time. Everybody's very angry all the time, and Trump has a very good way of making people a little bit nuts, like everybody who stormed the Capitol at his
Yeah.
death.
By the way, Sonny, this is my theory about the Lincoln Project. Now they've got a non-disclosure agreement issue about Jonathan Weaver or John Weaver. Apparently, they've got all these non-disclosure agreements about John Weaver, and I'm beginning to think the people who are obsessive Trump critics have a lot more in common with Trump than they know.
Maybe that is it. But Trump is a weirdly specifically destabilizing force in the country's history. I mean, I can't think of any other president who could have whipped his followers into a fervor to go and actually literally commit violence and smash into the Capitol and chase after members of Congress and senators and try to get them to reverse the Electoral College vote. I mean, he is a uniquely terrible person who is uniquely ill-suited to the presidency. And if he drives people a little bit crazy on Twitter, it's no different than the fact that he's driving people crazy in real life.
Well, he is clearly the most provocative president of modern times. I would go back and point you to John Brown and to Andrew Jackson's followers and other incendiary figures who drove Southern slave owners to assault other members of Congress. I mean, there's violence in America. We got Bernie Sanders followers trying to shoot up every member of Congress on a softball field, for goodness sake. It's a crazy time.
Sure. You had a lone nut trying to shoot up the Republican softball team. I mean, I lived in D.C. when that happened. It was pretty scary.
Yeah, it was a mile from my house.
But there's a difference between, a lone nut who has been, a John Hinckley sort, right? We wouldn't blame Reagan for John Hinckley, or we wouldn't blame Martin Scorsese for John Hinckley trying to kill Reagan, right? And there's a difference between a lone nut, being inspired to violence by, somebody they see on TV, and a figure who calls his leaders to, or a leader who calls his people to the city of Washington and has them storm the Capitol.
Well, no, wait. 800 of whom storm. He does not call on them to storm the Capitol, but
he sent them to the Capitol. He said, "Show them, we're gonna
Sonny,
show them."
okay, well, I wasn't going to litigate this with you. I wanted to go back to David Simon, but there are 15,000 people, 800 of whom enter the Capitol, many of whom need to go to jail for 20 years under the Sedition Act. And you'll get no argument from me. It was harrowing to see my friend Mitt Romney almost turn the wrong way into their grips. And Trump's culpability will be, I believe, actually tested as a criminal matter post-impeachment, when which he will be acquitted. But his impact on people are of a certain type, especially in Hollywood. And so my question is this performance art by Hollywood for Hollywood? In other words, do you have to hate Trump to advance in Hollywood now? And not only hate him, but hate everyone who understands him to have done good things like appoint 3 people to the Supreme Court?
I would say it's easier to advance in Hollywood if you hate Donald Trump. Certainly, there's not a whole lot to be gained by being a vocal Trump supporter in Hollywood. Certainly, and I do think that there is a kind of showiness to some of the Trump hatred that is undeniable. But again, Donald Trump has made himself a uniquely hateable figure.
Well, now that's where I wanted to go back to W. Was there the same thing concerning W? In other words, are we overlooking the fact that beginning probably with W, because it wasn't this way with the first Bush, Hollywood has gone so far to the left that they actually cannot. I paid Matt Continetti the ultimate compliment yesterday of being able to restate fairly his opposition's arguments and to understand them. Has Hollywood's left lost that ability?
Well, I mean, you mentioned George W. Bush because he was also definitely hated and frequently called a war criminal and stuff.
Right.
But at the same time, Oliver Stone, who is a person who hates the right as much as any filmmaker or figure in Hollywood's recent or not so recent history, made a very fair movie about George W. Bush. I mean, fair-ish. It was at least sympathetic to George W. Bush as a man, as a believer, a man of faith, that sort of stuff. I like I do think that Donald Trump is kind of uniquely hated and uniquely pernicious. I mean, the whole fight over SAG, that went down last week, between Trump and SAG is kind of telling insofar as it's a little bit silly that SAG was even talking about kicking him out, and then Trump throws a big baby fit and he's like, you can't fire me, I quit, and that's like a perfect synecdoche for this whole.
But what I'm asking, Sonny, and I'm going to blow through my break here because I want to get your answer to this, and I'll give you the last minute. Do you expect the next Republican president to be treated as badly or even worse in a continuation of the trend from W to Trump? Or do you believe Trump was uniquely bad because of Twitter and his behavior, and that it will revert to the norm of George H.W. Bush when it comes to Hollywood and its politicization?
Well, I mean, I would say I would hope that it reverts to something closer to, HW or W, in that it would be nice to have a little bit more normalcy. But I do think we live in kind of rapidly accelerating political polarization that is not good for anyone, or the mental health of anyone. I mean, look, I don't know what will happen if we ever elect another Republican. I'm sure we will at some point here. The damage of Donald Trump won't be permanent forever, but I don't know what Hollywood will do.
First of all, I think we're going to elect a Republican in 2024, and I think the good stuff that Donald Trump did will make that possible, but we will see. My question, uniquely troubled, typical Hollywood of the Trump era, and yeah, I know he lives in Baltimore, blah, 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 but he's part of the business. When you go look up, he's meeting reporters in various places, talking about various films and doing the whole Hollywood thing. He's just Hollywood. Is he attention seeking? Is he on a bad run when it comes to his projects? Is it he just hit 60? I'm not interested in rumors. I'm not trying to dox him. We never do that. You know me. I'm just genuinely curious. What makes someone this crazy on Twitter about someone he doesn't know, has never met, and was misrepresented in the original tweet that triggered it? Why do people live on Twitter to do other than talk about the Browns and the Indians? I don't know. I mean, I got to do show promotion and that, but just generally, you tell me. Go to hughhewitt.com. There's an email button. Find it. I don't want rumors. I'm not doxing him. I don't want, well, You know what I don't want? I just want to know from his former colleagues at the newspaper or those who worked with him what he's like. And if he's a saint, tell me he's a saint. You know, he says he dug into Marine Recon. There are a lot of journalists who spend a month embedded, and then they're not Tom Ricks. Let me put it to you that way. They're not the people that I've featured for years on this program who actually report from. They're not John Fisher Burns. He's not John Fisher Burns. Just let me know. Now, I do want to tell you about the impeachment trial. It was the same as it was the day before. The defense comes up today. It will be boring too, as the first defense was. They're not very good lawyers, in my opinion. And the president's going to be acquitted. I did my reporting last night. It is going to be an acquittal because it's an unconstitutional proceeding, because you cannot have impeachment conviction trials post-tenure. The framers were aware of that option. It was in the Pennsylvania state constitution at that time. Article 2, Section 4 is very explicit. It applies to presidents, vice presidents, and officials. Yes, you can escape prosecution by resigning. That doesn't, I mean, you can escape impeachment trial by resigning, but you can't escape prosecution by resigning. It's a means to get you out of office, and if you refuse to get out of office, they can add in the bar on future seeking of office, but you can't go back. Can't go back and prosecute your favorite people in the Senate, nor do we want that precedent. And if I were the president's lawyers, and I am not now, not ever, haven't been asked, I would nevertheless make my defense about 1 minute. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an unconstitutional proceeding, as 43 of you, Ted Cruz held open the possibility it was constitutional, called it a close question on this program, but voted not to proceed anyway. 44 of you have agreed that you shouldn't have proceeded through what we just saw for the reason that it was destructive of the country and unconstitutional. And we agree. We rest our case and ask you to acquit our client immediately so that the country can get back to real business. That's what I would do if I were them. They won't. They're not very good at this. But I do want to recommend one more thing to you. If you haven't watched The Wire, watch The Wire. I'll be back hour 2 of the Hugh Hewitt Show straight